The salvage pod descended through layers of rust-colored clouds, cutting through the atmosphere of Vex 7 like a knife through water. Inside, Jake Morrison sat alone in the cramped cockpit, watching the barren landscape below. His ship was old, held together by luck and determination more than anything else. The interior smelled like recycled air and burnt circuits. Jake had been salvaging for 12 years, ever since he left Earth looking for fortune and found only hard work instead. But he kept going. Something about finding lost things, rescuing what others had abandoned, made him feel alive. The ruins appeared suddenly through the haze, massive structures of crystal and metal jutting from the ground like the bones of something impossibly ancient. Jake had heard rumors about this place from other salvagers in the trading posts, whispers about temples and treasures, but nobody had ever come back with proof. Most people who went looking for the big score ended up dead or disappeared. Jake wasn't looking for treasure anymore. He was looking for parts. Rare components that he could sell to keep his ship flying. That's all. He landed the pod in a clearing near the largest structure, feeling the familiar jolt of contact with solid ground. Jake grabbed his basic toolkit, a handheld scanner, and a flashlight powered by a battery that was probably dying. He didn't expect to find anything valuable. He just needed enough to make this trip worthwhile. The pod's door hissed open, and the wind hit him immediately, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of minerals and something else he couldn't identify. Something old. The temple entrance gaped before him like a mouth. Jake stepped through carefully, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through cracks in the crystal walls. The beam of his flashlight caught something that made him stop dead. Movement. Inside the chamber, suspended in the air, were shapes. Massive, impossible shapes. At first, Jake thought they were statues. But then he saw them more clearly and his breath caught in his throat. Dragons. Real dragons. Not the mythological kind from old Earth stories, but actual living creatures. Enormous beings with wings folded against their bodies, their scales reflecting the faint blue glow of the energy fields holding them in place. Gold and crimson and deep purple shades that seemed to shift as Jake's light touched them. Some were easily 40 feet long from snout to tail. The smallest one was still bigger than his salvage pod. They floated in a grid pattern throughout the massive chamber, suspended by technology that Jake didn't recognize but could see was failing. The blue light that surrounded each dragon flickered irregularly. Sometimes it brightened for a moment, sometimes it dimmed until Jake could barely see the creature within it. The power cores, crude mechanisms of metal and crystal, were corroded and cracked. Whatever had kept these beings alive and dreaming in this stasis was breaking down. Jake could feel it in the air, a subtle vibration that suggested systems running on empty. He moved closer to one of the dragons, the oldest-looking one with scars along its neck and a horn that had been broken at the tip. Its chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Barely alive. The creature's eye, easily the size of Jake's head, was closed. But as he watched, it opened. Ancient and golden and terrifyingly aware. Jake froze, every instinct screaming at him to run. This thing could kill him in a second if it wanted to. Then something happened that Jake would spend years trying to explain to people who wouldn't believe him. A voice appeared in his mind. Not spoken through the air but somehow transmitted directly into his thoughts. It was weak, fragmented, like hearing someone speak from very far away through a bad connection. The words formed slowly with effort. Help. Please, help. Jake's legs felt weak. He looked at the power cores again, really looked at them this time. He could see what was wrong. The crystalline elements were degraded. The circuitry was overloaded. Someone had built these systems to last a long time, but nothing lasted forever. Whoever had put these dragons here had left them to die slowly, locked in dreams, their life support systems counting down to zero. Jake thought about leaving. He thought about it seriously. This wasn't a salvage operation. This was something else entirely, something that went beyond finding parts and making money. This was about choice. He could walk away, report nothing, let these impossible creatures fade away in this forgotten temple. Nobody would ever know. Nobody would ever blame him. He looked at the dragon again. At the ancient eye watching him with desperate hope. Then Jake set down his toolkit and his flashlight. He approached the nearest power core and examined it closely. His hands began to move automatically, pulling out tools, understanding the problem without needing to understand it completely. Some things Jake had learned you didn't do because they made sense. You did them because they were right. He picked up his tools again. And he stayed. The first day was the hardest. Jake worked without stopping, moving from one power core to the next, his hands shaking from the cold and the weight of what he was attempting. The temple had no heating system, or if it did, it had stopped working centuries ago. His breath came out in white clouds. His fingers went numb, then burned when feeling returned. But he kept working. The dragons watched him. At first, Jake felt their eyes on him constantly, tracking his movements, studying this small fragile creature who had chosen to help them instead of abandon them. He wondered what they were thinking. Were they planning something? Did they see him as a tool to be used? But there was something else in those ancient eyes, something that looked almost like curiosity, like they were trying to understand him the same way he was trying to understand them. Jake's approach to fixing the power cores was instinctive rather than scientific. He had no manual, no blueprint, nothing to tell him how these alien systems worked. But he understood machines. He understood how energy flowed through circuits, how degradation happened, how systems could be restored. He worked slowly and carefully, tracing the flow of power through crystalline pathways, identifying where the current was leaking away. He cleaned corrosion from the connections. He realigned the crystal elements that had shifted over centuries of dormancy. It was like solving a puzzle where he only had half the pieces, but somehow his hands knew what to do. By the end of the first day, Jake had repaired 2 power cores. The blue light around those 2 dragons stabilized, becoming steady and strong instead of flickering. The dragons' breathing deepened. Their color seemed to brighten. Jake watched this happen and felt something shift inside his chest. He was actually doing it. He was actually saving them. He found a water source, a small spring running through the back of the temple, probably fed by underground rivers. He drank from it and filled every container he could find. He rationed his food carefully. 1 meal bar a day. 1 bottle of water. The rest went to staying hydrated while he worked in the freezing cold. His body started to feel hollow, like something was being eaten away from the inside, but he pushed through it. On the second day, Jake's hands started bleeding. Small cuts appeared on his palms from handling the rough crystal edges. He wrapped them in strips from his emergency kit and kept working. The pain was sharp and clean. It helped him stay focused. He repaired 4 more power cores that day, and the light in that section of the temple became noticeably brighter. The dragons there shifted slightly in their stasis fields, as if responding to the improved life support. One dragon in particular seemed to be responding differently from the others. She was smaller than some of the massive war leaders, but her scales had a quality that caught the light beautifully, deep emerald green with gold flecks. Every time Jake worked near her power core, her eye would open and follow him. He got the sense that she was paying attention, really paying attention, to what he was doing and why he was doing it. Jake started talking to her while he worked. He didn't know if she could understand him, but something about speaking out loud made the silence of the temple feel less oppressive. He told her about his life. About leaving Earth because he felt like he didn't belong anywhere. About the loneliness of space salvage, working alone for months at a time. About the dream he'd had once, years ago, of finding something that mattered. Something worth more than credits or supplies. He told her that he thought maybe this was it. On the third day, Jake's back gave him serious trouble. He'd been bending and stretching, reaching into tight spaces, lifting heavy components. His muscles seized up with cramps. He had to stop working for hours, just breathing through the pain, knowing that if he pushed too hard he might injure himself permanently. Out here that would mean death. But he rested and drank water and ate another small meal bar, and eventually the spasms subsided enough for him to continue. The dragons began to communicate more clearly as their power cores stabilized. Not in words, but in images and feelings that appeared in Jake's mind. They showed him their history, flashes of a great war, of powerful ships attacking them, of being hunted and captured. They showed him the fear of imprisonment, the agony of stasis fields, the slow degradation of hope over centuries. And they showed him confusion about why this human, this fragile being, was helping them. They could offer him things. Ancient knowledge, technology, power. But Jake refused every offer. "I don't want anything," he said, speaking to the green dragon directly. "I just want to help you wake up." On the fourth day, Jake's body finally gave out. He collapsed near one of the power cores, his vision blurring, his muscles refusing to respond. He lay on the cold crystal floor, unable to move, unable to do anything but breathe. He thought maybe this was the end. Maybe he'd pushed too hard and now he was going to die here in this temple with these impossible creatures. Then something massive moved above him. The green dragon's wing extended over his body, not threatening but protective. The wing was warm, radiating heat like a blanket pulled fresh from a fire. Jake felt the dragon's presence in his mind more clearly than ever before. Not just images now but actual understanding. The dragon was showing him something that transcended language. The dragon was showing him recognition. She was telling him, in the only way she knew how, that she understood what he was. She understood that he was not like other humans. She understood that his choice to help them, his refusal of payment, his willingness to suffer for beings he'd never met, these things meant something profound. You are different, the thought came through, clearer and stronger than before. You are truly different. Jake had finished repairing the last power core just hours before. He was sitting against the temple wall, conserving energy when he felt it. A surge of power running through the entire structure. The blue stasis fields brightened dramatically, shifting from their steady glow to something more alive, more active. Something was happening. The dragons were waking up. The largest dragon, the war leader, Jake would later learn, was the first to fully regain consciousness. His name was Vorthak, and he had been frozen in stasis for longer than any of the others. His body convulsed violently as awareness flooded back into him after centuries of dreamless sleep. His muscles tensed. His claws flexed. His massive wings unfolded with a sound like thunder. The stasis field that had held him dissolved as his power core reached full capacity. Vorthak's eyes snapped open, and they were gold and terrible and furious. The war leader saw Jake immediately. He saw a small human figure standing alone in the temple. To Vorthak's ancient mind, freshly awakened and confused and enraged, there was only one explanation. This creature was his captor. This was the enemy who had imprisoned him. Every instinct that had kept Vorthak alive through centuries of dragon wars and galactic battles screamed at him to kill. Vorthak roared. The sound was so loud, so powerful that Jake felt it in his bones. The crystal walls of the temple cracked and shattered. Pieces of the ceiling fell like deadly rain. The sound echoed through the chamber for what seemed like forever, a pure expression of rage and confusion and the pain of returning to consciousness. The roar of a creature that had been betrayed, imprisoned, forgotten. The war leader's massive body moved with predatory grace despite having been frozen for so long. His claws, each one the size of a sword, extended fully. His wings spread wide, spanning nearly the entire width of the temple. And his head lowered, angling toward Jake with clear intent. This small human was about to die. Jake should have run. Every part of his mind was screaming at him to run. His legs were ready to move, his heart pounding so hard he thought his chest might explode. But something made him stop. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that he'd spent 3 days bleeding for these creatures. Maybe it was just that he'd already come this far and running seemed like the wrong answer. Jake didn't move. The claws came forward, reaching for his throat, and Jake closed his eyes. He thought about Earth. He thought about his small apartment, about the taste of real food, about sunlight on his face. He thought about how strange it was that his last moments would be here, in this frozen temple, with a dragon he tried to save. But the claws stopped inches from his throat. Jake opened his eyes and found himself staring directly into Vorthak's massive golden face. The war leader's breathing was heavy and violent, like an earthquake happening inside his chest. His eyes were full of confusion and rage, but also something else. Uncertainty. Jake's voice came out quietly, almost a whisper. I fixed your prison. I'm not your enemy. The words hung in the air between them. Vorthak's entire body was shaking with the effort of not killing this creature. Predators understand instinct. They understand hunger and territory and the drive to eliminate threats. But they also understand something else, the presence of a being without fear. In Vorthak's entire existence, no prey had ever stood before him without running or screaming. This fragile human was doing neither. This changed something fundamental in the equation. Vorthak pulled his claws back slowly, his breathing gradually becoming less violent. His massive head tilted, studying Jake from a different angle. The rage was still there, but it was being overtaken by something stronger, curiosity. One by one, the other dragons woke up over the next several hours. Each awakening was different. Some dragons emerged confused, disoriented by centuries of stasis, not understanding where they were or what had happened. Some emerged angry, ready for battle, seeing Jake as a potential threat before they understood the situation. A few emerged calm and aware, and these were the ones who seemed to comprehend immediately what Jake had done for them. Jake moved between them all, staying calm, speaking in low, steady tones. He didn't have much food left, but he shared what he had. He sat with the confused dragons, letting them acclimatize to consciousness. He faced down the angry ones without flinching, trusting that they would eventually understand. He held vigil with the grieving ones, and there were several who seemed to understand that something essential had been lost during their imprisonment. One dragon in particular affected Jake deeply. Her name was Helena, and she was smaller than the war leaders but carried herself with the dignity of a queen. When she first woke up, she was disoriented and afraid. Jake approached her carefully, and instead of trying to explain what had happened, he simply sat down beside her. He took her massive claw, easily the size of his entire body, and he held it gently in his hands. He didn't speak. He just sat there, human and dragon together in the dim light of the temple, sharing the weight of returning to consciousness. Helena's massive eyes filled with something that looked like tears. A dragon actually weeping. She turned her head toward Jake, and her telepathy came through clearly, without the static of confusion or rage. You stayed. You could have left. But you stayed. Jake nodded. I stayed, he confirmed. By the time the sun set outside the temple, all the dragons were awake. Some were still processing what had happened. Some were exploring their new mobility. But all of them seemed to understand one thing. This small human had chosen to suffer for them, had chosen to help them, had chosen to stay. And in a galaxy where most creatures saw each other as either prey or predators, that made Jake something unprecedented. He was something they had never encountered before. A being who acted out of compassion rather than survival. Jake spent the next day helping the dragons understand their situation. They were stronger now, their bodies recovering from the stasis, their minds becoming clearer. But they were still weak. Centuries of suspended animation had taken a toll that couldn't be reversed in just a few hours. Their muscles needed time to rebuild. Their reflexes were sluggish. Some of them could barely fly, their wings unsteady in the thin air of the temple. It was Vorthak who asked the question Jake had been dreading. Why did you do this? You could have enslaved us. You could have sold us to the highest bidder. You could have demanded anything, riches, power, knowledge. Why did you ask for nothing? Jake was sitting between two of the larger dragons, and he took a moment before answering. He thought about the truth. About loneliness. About being a salvager in an uncaring universe. About wanting just once to do something that mattered. Because you were dying, Jake said finally. And I could help. That's enough. The dragons exchanged looks, telepathic communication happening between them in frequencies Jake couldn't perceive. He could see them processing his answer, weighing it against their understanding of how the galaxy actually worked. In their experience, everything had a price. Everything was a transaction. The idea of pure altruism was foreign to them. But there was no time for philosophical discussions. Vorthak's expression suddenly changed. His entire body went rigid. His golden eyes widened with alarm. Jake felt the shift immediately. Something had changed in the war leader's demeanor, and it sent a chill down his spine. What's wrong? Jake asked. Vorthak's telepathy came through sharp and clear and frightened. My sensors. I'm detecting a ship. Large. Military designation. Valerian. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake's stomach dropped. The Valerian Empire. He'd heard the stories. Everyone in the salvage business knew about them. A galactic superpower that conquered worlds and enslaved entire populations. They were efficient, ruthless, and unstoppable. If they were coming here, there was only one reason. They know we're here, said Helena, moving closer to Jake. Her voice carried certainty and dread. They've always known. They probably sent automated detection systems to monitor our imprisonment. We're not free. We were never free. Another dragon, younger than the others, spoke with panic in his telepathic voice. We have to run. We have to leave this place now before they arrive. How long? Jake asked Vorthak, his mind already working through possibilities. Hours, the war leader said grimly. Perhaps less. Their ship is fast. And they will come in force. They learned long ago that dragons require overwhelming numbers to subdue. Jake stood up and started pacing. His hands were clenching and unclenching. He could run. He could take his salvage pod and leave right now, disappear into space before the Valorians arrived. He could survive this. He had a good chance of making it off-planet before they locked down the airspace. But if he ran, the dragons would be caught. They were still too weak to fight. They couldn't all escape in time. The Valorians would recapture them, and this time there would be no mercy. There would be no chance for rescue. Jake stopped pacing. He looked at Vorthak, at Helena, at all the dragons watching him with a mixture of hope and resignation. They were waiting for him to save himself. That's what any sensible creature would do. We don't run, Jake said quietly. What? Helena moved closer, her massive head lowering to be near Jake's level. We don't run, Jake repeated, louder this time. We're smarter than they are. We use strategy. Vorthak's golden eyes fixed on Jake with something that might have been hope. You have a plan? Jake was already moving toward his salvage pod, his mind racing through possibilities. Not yet. But I will. Come on. I need to access my ship's systems. Inside the pod, Jake's hands flew across the controls. His interface was basic. Salvage equipment never had the sophisticated technology of military vessels, but it was good enough for what he needed. He began reprogramming his ship's distress beacon, working with focused intensity. His fingers danced across the holographic displays, pulling up code, modifying signals, creating layers of false data. "What are you doing?" Vorthak asked, watching from the pod's entrance, his massive frame barely fitting through the doorway. "I'm sending a false signal," Jake explained, not looking up from his work. "A distress call from a completely different location. I'm making it look like my ship crashed somewhere else hundreds of kilometers away. When the Valorians arrive, they'll detect this beacon and assume I was already dead when they got here. A salvager who crashed trying to loot the ruins. It's a common story out here." "And what about us?" Helena asked. "You hide," Jake said. "I hide the temple. I'm going to disable the external power signature that your stasis fields would generate if they powered back up. To any scanner, this temple is just another dead ruin. No life signs. Nothing valuable. Just rock and crystal and the ghosts of dead civilizations." Vorthak watched this small human work with focused precision, and something shifted deep within the war leader's ancient heart. In his centuries of existence, Vorthak had been a military commander. He had led dragon squadrons in battles that shook entire star systems. He had understood strategy, tactics, the importance of positioning and overwhelming force. But he had never truly understood something fundamental about intelligence. The war leader had always believed that power came from strength. From size, from claws, from the ability to destroy. But watching Jake work, seeing this fragile human use his mind to outthink a problem that raw power couldn't solve, Vorthak suddenly understood. This was why humanity had survived in the galaxy at all. This was why they were dangerous. This was why they deserved to stand among the stars. "This is why we survived," Vorthak thought, watching Jake's hands move with practiced precision across the controls. Not strength. Ingenuity. Creativity. The ability to see solutions where others see only obstacles. Jake worked through the night, reprogramming everything, setting traps in the data streams, creating false trails for the Valorians to follow. The dragons watched him work, and they began to understand something profound. They had found an ally. Not a servant. Not a master. But a true ally. A being who stood with them not because he had to, but because he chose to. By the time the Valerian cruiser entered the system, everything was ready. Jake's false beacon was broadcasting from a location far away. The temple's external systems were dark and silent. The dragons were hidden deep inside the crystal chambers, their life signs masked by layers of ancient technology that Jake had cleverly repurposed. And Jake himself was waiting, ready for whatever came next, knowing that for the first time in his lonely life, he wasn't facing the universe alone. The Valerian cruiser dropped from hyperspace like a predator descending on wounded prey. It was massive, a military vessel designed to intimidate, to project power, to remind every world they visited that resistance was futile. The ship's weapons systems were state-of-the-art. Its hull could withstand sustained bombardment. Its crew had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved countless species. They were the iron fist of an empire that had ruled the galaxy unchallenged for centuries. Jake's salvage pod appeared on their sensors exactly as planned. A dead derelict, power systems offline, no signs of life. A worthless wreck of a ship, barely worth salvaging. The Valerian commander ordered troops to board it anyway, standard procedure when investigating any anomaly. The Imperial soldiers were professional, efficient, armed with weapons that could vaporize a man at 50 paces. They moved through Jake's ship with tactical precision, expecting to find nothing but an empty vessel and perhaps a corpse. They found Jake sitting in the captain's chair, deliberately unarmed, deliberately defenseless. He was bloodied and exhausted, looking exactly like a salvager who had survived a crash and nothing else. The soldiers restrained him quickly, their weapons trained on his chest. The commander, a tall Valerian officer named Krell with cold gray eyes and scars across his face, came aboard to interrogate the prisoner personally. "What is your name?" Krell demanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Jake Morrison," the human replied calmly. "Just a salvager. I was investigating the ruins when my ship malfunctioned. Been stranded here for days." Krell studied him with the eyes of someone who had interrogated thousands of suspects. "The ruins. You found anything of value?" "Nothing," Jake lied smoothly. "Just dead technology. Worthless junk. That's why I stayed, trying to salvage enough to fix my ship and get out of here." The commander seemed satisfied with this answer. A lone salvager stranded on a dead planet was beneath his concern. He ordered his troops to secure the perimeter and then turned his attention back to the temple. The sensors were picking up something unusual, massive crystalline structures but no power signatures, no signs of life. Just an empty monument to a dead civilization. That's when everything changed. The dragons emerged from the temple not in a wild frenzy of rage, but in a coordinated military formation. Vorthak led the charge, his massive wings spread wide, his golden scales catching the light of the planet's sun. Behind him came Helena and the other war leaders, their movements perfectly synchronized. They had trained for centuries in coordinated combat. They understood tactics and positioning. But they didn't attack with indiscriminate fury. They attacked with precision. The first wave of dragon fire targeted the Valerian cruiser's weapon systems. The plasma breath burned through the ship's exterior defenses with surgical accuracy, disabling the point defense cannons, destroying the missile launch tubes, rendering the vessel's main weaponry inert. The second wave targeted the communications array, cutting off the ship's ability to call for reinforcements. The third wave sealed the landing bay doors, trapping the soldiers on the ground and preventing them from retreating to their ship. The Valerian troops fought back, their weapons cutting through the air with deadly precision. But dragons are not slow, lumbering creatures. They are fast, intelligent, experienced. They moved through the crossfire with grace and determination, their centuries of experience in actual combat far outweighing the Valerian soldiers' training. And they didn't kill indiscriminately. They disarmed. They disabled. They gave the troops no choice but to retreat or surrender. Within minutes, the Imperial soldiers had been forced into a defensive position, weaponless, surrounded. The commander, Krell, found himself face to face with Jake Morrison, and behind the human stood 5 dragons, their eyes burning with ancient intelligence and something that looked like righteous fury. Jake's appearance had changed. The blood on his face was real, earned through genuine struggle, but the exhaustion was gone. In its place was clarity, purpose. The look of a man who had crossed some threshold and could never go back. The age of conquest ends here, Jake said, his voice steady and certain. These beings are free. The sector is theirs. The Valerian Empire will recognize their sovereignty, or humanity and dragons will make sure you regret every day after. Commander Krell's face went pale. In all his years of service to the Valerian Empire, he had never faced anything like this. He had never conceived that it was possible. The dragons were supposed to be imprisoned. They were supposed to be neutralized. And they were supposed to remain isolated, separated from any potential allies. The Valorians had never accounted for one crucial variable. What would happen if the dragons found a friend? What would happen if humanity and dragons stood together? The commander looked at his troops, weaponless and defeated. He looked at the cruiser behind him, its weapon systems destroyed, its communications dark. He looked at the dragons surrounding him, beings of immense power and intelligence, no longer willing to be slaves. And then he looked at Jake, a single human who had somehow orchestrated the impossible. "We will withdraw," Krell said finally, his voice stripped of its previous arrogance. "The Valerian Empire will recognize Draconir's sovereignty and the independence of this sector. You have my word as an officer." It was not a negotiation. It was an acknowledgement of defeat. The commander gave the order for his troops to stand down. They were escorted back to their crippled cruiser. The ship's engines were still functional enough to retreat, though it would be a long, slow journey back to Valerian space. As the vessel limped away from Vex 7, reduced from an instrument of conquest to a crippled messenger bearing news of an impossible alliance, something shifted in the galaxy. The age of absolute Valerian dominance had ended not with a grand military campaign, but with a single human and a group of dragons who had chosen to stand together. As the Imperial ship disappeared into the stars, Vorthak approached Jake. The massive war leader's claw, easily the size of Jake's entire head, reached out slowly, gently and placed itself on the human's shoulder. Not in aggression. Not in dominance. But in brotherhood. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In that single gesture, Vorthak was acknowledging something profound. Jake had shown the dragons something they had forgotten during their imprisonment, that strength was not just about claws and fire and ancient power. That sometimes the most dangerous being in the galaxy was the one who refused to be bound by the rules everyone else accepted. The one who looked at an impossible situation and said, "We don't run. We're smarter than this." Jake and the dragons had become something the galaxy had never seen before. Not conquerors or conquered. Not masters or servants. But true allies. Brothers and sisters across species, bound not by necessity or survival instinct but by choice. by mutual respect, by the recognition that together, they could accomplish what neither could achieve alone. As the dragons led Jake back into the temple, preparing to build something new on Vex 7, a sanctuary, a civilization, a beacon of hope for every being in the galaxy who was tired of being oppressed, something profound had changed in the cosmos. Humanity had just shown the galaxy their hidden gift. Not strength or advanced technology or military might, but ingenuity, compassion, the ability to see value where others saw only obstacles, the capacity to stand with the broken and forgotten and say, "You matter. Your life matters. And I will bleed for you." That was humanity's true power. That was the gift that would, in time, change everything. Indeed.